The Kansas prairie had a way of making you feel both infinite and insignificant at the same time. Emma Whitmore stood on the porch of her small sod house, watching the storm clouds gather on the western horizon like a dark army preparing for battle. The wind was already picking up, carrying the smell of rain and electricity across the endless sea of grass that stretched in every direction. She had maybe an hour before the storm hit, and there was still work to be done. At 16, Emma had been living alone for 8 months, ever since cholera had taken both her parents within days of each other. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles east, and the closest town, Junction City, was a hard day's ride north. Most people would have given up on the homestead, would have sold the land and moved to civilization. But Emma's parents had died believing in this place, in the dream of making something from nothing on the Kansas frontier, and she wasn't ready to abandon that dream. Not yet. She moved quickly, securing the chickens in their coop, bringing the milk cow into the small barn, checking that the shutters were properly latched. The prairie storms could be violent, with winds strong enough to tear away anything not properly secured. Her father had built the sod house well, cutting thick blocks from the earth itself, creating walls that could withstand almost anything nature threw at them. It was dark inside and the ceiling leaked when it rained, but it had kept Emma alive through the brutal Kansas winter, and it would protect her through this storm too. She was dragging the last water barrel inside when she heard something that made her freeze. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the approaching thunder, a metallic clink, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond the barn. Emma's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped beside the door, her father's Springfield, which she had learned to shoot with reluctant accuracy. The sound came again, clink, 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 like chains dragging across stone. Every instinct told Emma to go inside, bar the door and wait out the storm. Nothing good came from investigating strange sounds on the prairie, especially with a tempest approaching. But curiosity and something else, maybe loneliness, maybe the part of her that was tired of always choosing the safe path, made her grab the rifle and move toward the sound. The wind was fierce now, whipping her long auburn hair across her face and pressing her simple cotton dress against her body. The sky had turned a sickly green-gray. The color that meant dangerous weather was imminent. She rounded the barn and saw him. A man lay in the tall grass about 50 yards from her property line, barely visible except for the movement he made trying to crawl forward. He was chained, heavy iron shackles around his wrists and ankles, connected by a length of chain that had been staked into the ground. But the stakes were pulling loose, dragged up by his determined efforts to move forward, creating that metallic sound that had caught Emma's attention. As she got closer, her breath caught. He wasn't a white settler. His skin was bronze, his long black hair was matted with blood and dirt, and even in his weakened state there was something about his bearing that spoke of strength and dignity. Pawnee, she realized, or perhaps Cheyenne, one of the tribes that still moved through Kansas territory, caught between their traditional lands and the relentless push of white settlement. He had been beaten badly. His face was swollen, one eye completely closed, his lips split and bleeding. His clothing, what remained of it, was torn and stained with blood, both dried and fresh. Someone had chained him here and left him to die, probably days ago, judging by his condition. The approaching storm would finish what the chains and exposure had started. Emma should have walked away. That's what any sensible person would do. Indians were dangerous, everyone said so. The newspapers were full of stories about raids and violence, about settlers killed and homesteads burned. Her own parents had been terrified of Indian attacks, though they'd never actually seen one in their 2 years on the prairie. But as Emma looked at this man, this warrior who had been chained like an animal and left to die slowly, she didn't see a dangerous savage. She saw a human being in desperate need of help, and she remembered her mother's voice, reading from the Bible on quiet evenings. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was sick and you looked after me. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and cold. The storm was here. Emma made her decision in an instant. She set down the rifle and knelt beside the warrior, examining the chains. The locks were crude but sturdy, designed more for restraint than security. Her father had been a blacksmith before coming west, and he'd taught Emma the basics of metalwork. She pulled the lockpick set from her pocket, tools she carried more from habit than expectation of using them, and went to work on the wrist shackles. The warrior's eyes opened as she worked, and she found herself looking into dark pools of pain and confusion. He tried to speak, but only a croak came out. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Don't talk," Emma said quietly, though she doubted he understood English. "I'm getting you out of here." The rain was coming harder now, and thunder rolled across the prairie like artillery fire. Emma's fingers worked frantically at the locks, and finally, blessedly, the first shackle clicked open. Then the second. She moved to his ankles, working faster as the storm intensified. The wind was howling now, and visibility was dropping rapidly. When the last shackle fell away, the warrior tried to stand but collapsed immediately. Emma realized he wouldn't be able to walk on his own. He was at least 6 feet tall and probably outweighed her by 70 pounds, but she had no choice. She got her shoulder under his arm and half dragged, half carried him toward the house. It was the longest 50 yards of Emma's life. The rain was a wall of water now, the wind so strong she could barely stand. The warrior was semi-conscious, his weight nearly crushing her, his feet dragging uselessly in the mud. But Emma kept moving, driven by a stubbornness that had kept her alive and alone on this homestead for 8 months. They reached the porch, and Emma somehow managed to get him through the door. She collapsed under his weight, both of them falling to the packed earth floor in a tangle of limbs and chains. For a moment, she just lay there, gasping for breath, listening to the storm rage outside, with a fury that shook even the thick sod walls. Then she forced herself up and got to work. First, water. She lifted his head and carefully dribbled water between his cracked lips, not too much at first, remembering what her father had taught her about treating severe dehydration. The warrior swallowed reflexively, and she gave him more, watching his throat work as life-giving moisture entered his parched body. Next, she needed to assess his injuries. Emma lit the kerosene lamp and examined him more carefully. The beating had been savage and systematic, bruised ribs, possibly broken, deep cuts on his back that looked like whip marks, infected wounds on his wrists and ankles from the shackles, and what might be a concussion from the head wound that had matted his hair with blood. Emma had limited medical supplies, but her mother had been skilled in frontier medicine, and she'd taught Emma everything she knew. She heated water on the small stove, mixed a solution of salt and herbs, and began cleaning the warrior's wounds. He stirred occasionally, groaning in pain, but never fully regained consciousness. As she worked through the night, the storm raging outside, Emma found herself talking to him in a low voice, partly to calm herself, partly in the hope that somehow her tone would reassure him, even if he couldn't understand the words. "I don't know who you are or why they did this to you," she said softly as she bandaged his ribs. "But nobody deserves to be treated like this. Nobody deserves to be chained and left to die." She cleaned the whip marks on his back, wincing at the cruelty they represented. "My name is Emma Whitmore. This is my home. Well, it was my parents' home, but they're gone now. It's just me here. Just me and the chickens and one very stubborn milk cow." The storm continued through the night, and Emma continued her work. She covered him with blankets, built up the fire to warm him, spooned thin broth between his lips every hour. She removed the chains completely, hiding them under the floorboards where they wouldn't be seen. As dawn approached and the storm finally began to subside, Emma sat back and looked at what she had done. She had a Pawnee warrior, a complete stranger, someone her community would consider an enemy, unconscious in her home. If anyone found out, the consequences would be severe. She could be branded a traitor, driven from her land, possibly arrested. But as she watched him breathing steadily, his color slightly better than it had been, she felt no regret. Only a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. The warrior's eyes opened slightly, focusing on her face with difficulty. For a moment, they just looked at each other. This white girl, barely more than a child, and this indigenous warrior who had been left to die. He tried to speak, and this time a single word emerged, rough and barely audible. "Why?" Emma understood the question, even if she didn't understand the language. Why had she saved him? Why had she risked everything to help a stranger, an enemy? She thought about all the complicated reasons she could give. But in the end, she answered with the simple truth. Because it was the right thing to do. Something shifted in his expression. The wariness didn't disappear entirely, but it softened, and he gave the smallest nod before his eyes closed again, This time in healing sleep rather than unconsciousness, Emma stood and moved to the window, looking out at the prairie washed clean by the storm. The sun was rising, painting the endless grasslands in shades of gold and green. It was beautiful, and it was also dangerous because out there somewhere were the men who had chained the warrior and left him to die. And when they came back to check their work, and they would come back, Emma would need to be ready. She had crossed a line by saving him, had made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Now she would have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. But as she touched the small silver cross her mother had given her, hanging around her neck, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. She had sheltered a captive warrior in silence. And though she didn't know it yet, that silent act of courage would soon echo across the Kansas prairie, bringing riders from every direction and forcing Emma to discover exactly how strong she could be when everything was on the line. 3 days passed, and the warrior, who Emma learned was called Lone Hawk through a combination of sign language and his limited English, slowly regained his strength. She kept him hidden in the small root cellar beneath the main room, a space her father had dug for storing vegetables. It was cramped and dark, but it was safe, and Lone Hawk seemed to understand the necessity of remaining concealed. Emma fell into a careful routine. During the day, she worked her homestead as normal, tending the garden, caring for the animals, maintaining the appearance of a young woman living alone and minding her own business. But in the early mornings and late evenings, she would bring food and water to the cellar, check Lone Hawk's healing wounds, and slowly, carefully, begin to learn his story. His English was broken but functional, learned from trading with white settlers before the conflicts had intensified. And Emma discovered she had a natural talent for the sign language used for communication between tribes and traders. Through this combination of methods, a picture emerged. Lone Hawk was a scout for the Pawnee, one of the tribes that had historically allied with white settlers against their traditional enemies, the Sioux and Cheyenne. But recently, a group of land speculators had been trying to push Pawnee bands off valuable territory near the Republican River, land that had been guaranteed to them by treaty. When Lone Hawk discovered evidence that these speculators were falsifying documents and bribing government officials, he had tried to bring the proof to the army garrison at Fort Riley. He never made it. The speculators' men had ambushed him, beaten him, taken his evidence, and chained him on the prairie as a warning to anyone else who might interfere with their schemes. They had chosen Emma's property specifically because it was isolated. They hadn't expected anyone to find him before he died. "They kill many dreams," Lone Hawk said haltingly on the third evening, as Emma changed the bandages on his wrists. "Take land promised by white man's words. Make people move, 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 always moving, never home." Emma listened, and with each piece of his story her anger grew. She had been so isolated on her homestead that she hadn't paid much attention to the larger conflicts swirling through Kansas territory. But now, hearing about the corruption and cruelty from someone who had experienced it directly, she couldn't ignore it. "The men who did this to you," she asked carefully, "do you know their names?" Lone Hawk nodded grimly. "Leader is called Cyrus Blackwell. Big man, yellow hair, voice like thunder. He has many men who follow him, do bad things. They want Pawnee land to sell to railroad, make much money from our suffering." The name meant nothing to Emma, but she filed it away. If Lone Hawk was telling the truth, and she had no reason to doubt him, then there were dangerous men who would soon realize their prisoner had escaped. And when they came looking, they would remember the isolated homestead where they'd left him. On the fourth day, Emma's fears materialized. She was in the garden harvesting beans when she spotted dust on the eastern horizon. Riders, at least half a dozen, moving in her direction. Her heart began to pound, but she forced herself to remain calm, to keep working as if nothing was wrong. The riders approached steadily, and Emma could soon make out details. 6 men, well armed, led by a large man with yellow hair that gleamed in the sunlight. Cyrus Blackwell. It had to be. Emma straightened up and wiped her hands on her apron, trying to appear unconcerned even as her mind raced. She had maybe 2 minutes before they arrived. Enough time to warn Lone Hawk, but not enough time for him to escape even if he was strong enough to run. She walked quickly to the house, opened the root cellar door, and looked down at Lone Hawk. His eyes were alert. He had heard the horses, too. "Stay silent," she whispered urgently. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, don't make a sound. Promise me." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You are a brave woman, Emma Whitmore. I will be silent like stone." Emma closed the cellar door and arranged the rug over it, then grabbed her rifle and stepped outside just as the riders pulled up in front of her house. Cyrus Blackwell was indeed a big man, tall and broad with features that might have been handsome if they weren't twisted by arrogance and cruelty. His pale blue eyes assessed Emma with the casual contempt of someone who considered himself superior in every way. "Well, well," he said, his voice indeed like thunder, deep and commanding. "Living out here all alone, are you, girl? That's mighty dangerous in these parts." "I manage just fine, sir," Emma replied, keeping her voice steady. "What can I do for you?" "Name's Cyrus Blackwell. These are my associates. We're looking for an Indian that escaped from custody a few days back. Dangerous savage, killed 2 men in Abilene. You seen any Indians around these parts?" Emma met his eyes without flinching, grateful for 8 months of practice in hiding her emotions from the loneliness and fear of isolation. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks, sir. It's pretty quiet out here." "That's so?" Blackwell dismounted with casual authority, and his men followed suit. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to make sure you're safe, of course." It wasn't really a question. Emma's hand tightened on her rifle. "Actually, I do mind. This is private property, Mr. Blackwell, and I don't recall inviting you to search it." Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now that's not very neighborly. We're just trying to help keep you safe from dangerous Indians. You should be grateful. I appreciate your concern, but it's not necessary. I'm perfectly safe." One of Blackwell's men, a weasel-faced character with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "Boss, maybe the girl's hiding something. Maybe she's one of them Indian lovers we heard about." Emma's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm just a woman trying to work her land in peace. Now, I've told you I haven't seen any Indians, and I'd appreciate it if you'd respect my property and move along." Blackwell took a step closer, and Emma raised her rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at him, but making it clear she could if necessary. "That's a dangerous thing to do, girl. Pointing a weapon at law-abiding citizens. I'm not pointing it at anyone yet, but like I said, this is my property, and I have the right to defend it." For a tense moment, Emma thought Blackwell would force the issue. His men were spreading out, positioning themselves strategically. She was outnumbered 6-1, and if they decided to search the house by force, there was nothing she could do to stop them. But then something unexpected happened. Another group of riders appeared on the western horizon. Not many, maybe 3 or 4, but their arrival seemed to change Blackwell's calculation. He glanced at them, then back at Emma, his expression hardening. "We'll be back," he said quietly, a promise and a threat combined. "That Indian's out here somewhere, and when we find him, we'll also find out who helped him, and anyone who aids an escaped criminal is going to face serious consequences." He mounted his horse with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "You seem like a smart girl. Think carefully about whether protecting a savage is worth losing everything you have. Your land, your reputation, maybe even your freedom." The riders left, but Emma could feel Blackwell's gaze burning into her back until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did she lower the rifle, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She waited a full 10 minutes, watching the prairie in all directions, before opening the root cellar. Lone Hawk climbed out, moving more easily now that his strength was returning. He had heard everything. "You should not have protected me," he said quietly. "That man, he is dangerous. He will come back and he will bring more men." "Probably," Emma agreed, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I couldn't just hand you over to them. They'd kill you. Better one dead than one dead and one ruined. He will destroy you, Emma Whitmore, if he thinks you helped me." Emma thought about her parents' graves on the hill behind the house, about 8 months of surviving alone, about all the times she'd been afraid and lonely and tempted to give up. And she realized something important. She was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of accepting injustice because fighting it seemed too dangerous. "Maybe," she said firmly, "or maybe it's time someone stood up to men like Blackwell. Maybe it's time someone said that what they're doing is wrong, and that not everyone is going to just look the other way." Lone Hawk studied her face, and something like respect dawned in his expression. "You are like Hawk yourself, small but fierce, willing to fight when necessary. This is good spirit. Over the next 2 days, Lone Hawk's strength returned more fully, and Emma began to face the reality that he would need to leave soon. He couldn't stay hidden in her cellar forever, and his people would be worried about him. But there was a problem. Blackwell's men were still searching the area. Emma had spotted riders on the horizon multiple times, circling, watching, waiting. "They're blocking the paths," she told Lone Hawk on the 6th evening. "Every route away from here seems to have riders watching. It's like they're surrounding this place, waiting for you to make a move." "They know I am here," Lone Hawk said grimly. "Or they suspect strongly. They wait like wolves around wounded buffalo, patient and hungry. So what do we do?" Lone Hawk looked at her seriously. "There is way, but it is dangerous for you. My people, they are camped 20 miles north near the Smoky Hill River. If message can reach them, they will come. But Emma, if you help me send message, if you ride out from here, Blackwell's men will follow you. They will know you helped me. There will be no more hiding, no more pretending." Emma thought about that, about the choice she'd made when she'd freed Lone Hawk from his chains, and all the choices since then. About the fact that she'd been living in a kind of silence for 8 months, hiding from the world, pretending she could survive alone and isolated forever. Maybe it was time to stop being silent. Maybe it was time to make some noise. "Tell me how to reach your people," she said firmly, "and tell me what message to bring." As night fell over the Kansas prairie, Emma prepared for the ride that would change everything. She packed supplies, saddled her horse, and memorized the signs and words that would identify her to the Pawnee Scouts. Lone Hawk gave her a medicine bag he wore around his neck, his most precious possession, a sign that he trusted her completely, and a token that would prove she came with his blessing. "When you ride out tomorrow," he said, "Blackwell's men will follow. They will try to stop you, try to make you tell them where I am. You must be faster, smarter, braver than they expect." "I've been faster, smarter, and braver than people expect my whole life," Emma replied with a slight smile. "I'm a 16-year-old girl running a homestead alone on the Kansas prairie. Underestimating me is something folks do regularly." Lone Hawk smiled too, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "This is why you will succeed, Emma Whitmore. You have warrior's heart in unexpected body. This is most dangerous kind of warrior, the kind enemy never sees coming." As Emma lay down to sleep that night, she thought about the next day's ride, about the dangerous men who would pursue her, about the uncertain alliance she was forging with people her society called enemies. She thought about her parents and wondered what they would think of their daughter now, sheltering an Indian warrior, defying powerful men, preparing to ride out into danger. She hoped they would understand. She hoped they would be proud, because tomorrow Emma Whitmore's silence would end with thunder. Tomorrow she would ride, and the riders would come from every direction. And tomorrow she would discover exactly what she was capable of when courage was the only choice left. Emma rose before dawn, moving silently through her morning routine one last time. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, and took care of all the small tasks that had defined her life for 8 months. Part of her wondered if she would ever do these simple chores again, or if today's ride would change everything irreversibly. Lone Hawk was waiting by the door, stronger now, but still not fully healed. They had planned everything carefully during the night. Emma would ride north, making it obvious she was heading somewhere with purpose. Blackwell's men would follow. They'd been waiting for exactly this kind of move. While they pursued her, Lone Hawk would slip out heading west, taking advantage of the distraction to put distance between himself and the homestead. "If something goes wrong," Lone Hawk said seriously, "if they catch you, you tell them nothing. Say you were going to Junction City for supplies. Say you rode north because it is shorter path. Give them no reason to know about me." "They'll know," Emma said quietly. "The moment I ride out with purpose, they'll know I'm helping you. There's no point pretending otherwise. Then why you do this? Why you risk everything?" Emma thought about that question, the same one he'd asked when he first woke in her home, the question that had defined every choice since then. "Because 8 months ago I lost my parents, and I thought I'd lost everything. I've been surviving, but that's all, just surviving. Existing alone, speaking to no one, touching no one's life and having no one touch mine. That's not living, Lone Hawk, that's just waiting to die slowly." She checked her saddle one more time, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "When I found you in those chains, something changed. I had a choice. Walk away and stay safe, or help and risk everything. And I realized that the person I'd become, living alone in silence and fear, wasn't someone I wanted to be. So I helped, and every choice since then has been about becoming someone I can be proud of, someone my parents would recognize. You are already someone to be proud of, Lone Hawk said simply. You show courage many warriors never find. Your silence was loud protest against cruelty. Now your voice will be louder still. Emma mounted her horse, a sturdy mare named Duchess, that had served her family well. The sun was just beginning to color the eastern horizon, painting the prairie in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, and Emma took a moment to appreciate it, to burn the image into her memory just in case. Wait 3 hours after I leave, she told Lone Hawk. By then, all of Blackwell's men should be following me, and you can slip away west. There's a creek 5 miles in that direction. Follow it north and it will lead you toward your people. I will not forget what you do, Emma Whitmore. My people will not forget. You are friend to Pawnee now for all time. This I promise. They clasped hands briefly, and then Emma turned Duchess north and rode out. She kept the pace steady but not hurried, wanting to be spotted but not wanting to appear suspicious. Sure enough, within 20 minutes, she saw riders emerging from concealment to the east, 3 of Blackwell's men, just as she'd expected. They didn't approach immediately, just followed at a distance, watching. Emma continued north, her heart pounding but her face calm. The prairie stretched endlessly ahead, an ocean of grass rippling in the morning breeze. Somewhere out there, 20 miles distant, was the Pawnee camp. If she could reach it, if she could deliver Lone Hawk's message, help would come. But 20 miles was a long way with pursuers behind her. The riders closed in after an hour, and Emma recognized the weasel-faced man from before, along with 2 others she hadn't seen. They spread out, flanking her, and she had no choice but to stop. "Morning, miss," Weaselface said with a mocking smile. "That's an interesting direction you're riding. Junction cities to the east and Abilene south. So where exactly are you headed?" "I don't recall having to report my movements to you," Emma replied coolly. "Last I checked, riding on the open prairie wasn't a crime. It is when you're harboring fugitives. We know you've been helping that Indian girl. Might as well admit it now and save everyone some trouble." "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been home alone, working my land. If your escaped prisoner got away, that's your problem, not mine." One of the other riders, a burly man with cold eyes, moved closer. "Search her. Check her saddlebags." Emma's hand moved toward her rifle, but there were 3 of them and they were ready for trouble. Weaselface dismounted and grabbed Duchess's reins before Emma could react. The burly man pulled her saddlebags open, searching through her supplies, and found the medicine bag. "Well, well," he said slowly, holding it up. "What's a white girl doing with Pawnee medicine? This is his, isn't it? The Scouts, which means you've been talking to him, helping him." His smile was ugly. "Blackwell's gonna want to hear about this. And the Territorial Marshal, too. You're in serious trouble, girl." Emma's mind raced. The medicine bag was proof she'd been in contact with Lone Hawk, and these men wouldn't hesitate to use it against her. But admitting anything would be worse. "I found it on the prairie during my morning chores. I was curious what it was, so I kept it." "That doesn't prove anything." "Sure it doesn't," Weaselface sneered. "Tie her hands. We're taking her back to—" He never finished the sentence. An arrow whispered through the morning air and buried itself in the ground between his feet. He jumped back with a startled curse, and suddenly the prairie was alive with movement. Pawnee Scouts materialized from the tall grass where they'd been concealed, at least a dozen of them, with bows drawn and rifles raised. They surrounded the 3 riders in a perfect circle, and more were visible in the distance, approaching rapidly on horseback. The burly man reached for his gun, but one of the scouts spoke sharply in Pawnee, and the tone was unmistakable: "Move and die." The riders' hands slowly rose, weapons left holstered. From among the scouts, an older warrior rode forward. His face was weathered but noble, with grey streaking his long black hair and eyes that held both wisdom and authority. He spoke in Pawnee, looking directly at Emma, and his tone was formal, respectful. One of the younger scouts translated, "Chief Lone Wolf says the daughter of Whitmore, who shelters warriors, is known to us. Lone Hawk's brother found him at dawn, brought him to our camp, told us of your courage. The chief says you are under Pawnee protection now. These men who hunt you will leave, or they will not leave alive." Emma felt tears of relief burning in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Tell Chief Lone Wolf that I'm honored by his protection and grateful that Lone Hawk is safe. The translation was made, and the chief nodded gravely. He spoke again, longer this time, and the young scout translated carefully. He says you have shown great courage and honor. You could have ignored Lone Hawk's suffering, could have left him to die as these cowardly men intended. Instead, you risked everything to save him, to shelter him, to protect him even when powerful men threatened you. This is the action of a warrior, regardless of age or gender. The Pawnee people honor such courage. The chief turned his attention to Blackwell's men and spoke with evident contempt. The translator's voice turned hard. He says you are like coyotes who attack the wounded and weak. You chain a scout and leave him to die slowly, without honor, without mercy. You threaten a young woman who lives alone and has done you no harm. You are not warriors. You are cowards, and cowards have no place on this prairie. Weaselface found his voice, though it shook slightly. You can't do this. We're American citizens. If you attack us, the army will... The army will what? The question came from a new voice, speaking perfect English with a military cadence. Emma turned and saw a patrol of U.S. cavalry approaching from the west. At least 20 soldiers led by an officer she didn't recognize. The cavalry captain dismounted and approached the scene, taking in the standoff with sharp eyes. I'm Captain Daniel Wright, stationed at Fort Riley. Someone want to tell me what's happening here? For a moment, everyone started talking at once, but Captain Wright raised his hand for silence. He looked at each group, the Pawnee scouts, Blackwell's men, and Emma, then focused on the chief. Lone Wolf and I have met before. He's a man of honor. So I'm going to ask him to explain, and I'll trust his word. Through the translator, Chief Lone Wolf told the story. Lone Hawk's discovery of the land fraud, his capture and torture by Blackwell's men, Emma's rescue and sheltering of him, and the threats made against her. One of the scouts produced papers they'd found among Lone Hawk's belongings before his capture, documents showing falsified land deeds and bribery payments. Captain Wright examined the papers, his expression growing darker. He turned to Weaselface and the others. These documents show criminal activity, fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. You men are under arrest, and when we track down Cyrus Blackwell, he'll join you. You can't arrest us on the word of Indians, the burly man protested. I'm arresting you on the evidence of these documents and the testimony of Miss Whitmore here, who I'm guessing can corroborate the story. Wright looked at Emma. Miss, can you tell me what happened? Emma took a deep breath and told everything, finding Lone Hawk, the beating and chains, Blackwell's threats, the surveillance of her property. As she spoke, she felt the weight of 8 months of silence lifting from her shoulders. She had kept quiet for so long, had hidden her thoughts and feelings and fears. Now, finally, she could speak truth, and it felt like freedom. When she finished, Captain Wright nodded slowly. You're a brave young woman, Miss Whitmore. What you did, sheltering Lone Hawk, standing up to Blackwell, that took real courage. The kind of courage that makes a difference. He turned to Chief Lone Wolf. On behalf of the U.S. Army, I apologize for what was done to your scout. This kind of criminal activity undermines everything we're trying to build in this territory. Cooperation, mutual respect, and honest dealings between all peoples. Chief Lone Wolf spoke, and the translator conveyed his words. The chief says apologies are words. Action is what matters. He asks what will be done to make this right, to ensure it does not happen again. Captain Wright gestured to the documents. These papers are evidence of widespread fraud. With Miss Whitmore's testimony and Lone Hawk's account, we can prosecute Blackwell and his organization. I'll send word to the territorial governor immediately. The land that was stolen through false documents will be returned to its rightful owners, including your people. And the girl, Chief Lone Wolf asked through the translator. She has made powerful enemies by helping us. When you soldiers leave, when we return to our camps, she will be alone again. Blackwell's allies will seek revenge. The truth of this hung heavy in the air. Emma had known from the beginning that helping Lone Hawk would have consequences, but hearing it stated so plainly made her realize just how precarious her situation had become. She couldn't go back to her old life of isolated silence. Blackwell and his men knew she had defied them, had helped their prisoner escape, had testified against them. Even if Blackwell himself was arrested, his associates would remain, and frontier justice was often swift and brutal. Captain Wright seemed to be thinking along the same lines. Miss Whitmore will be under Army protection. I'll station a detail at her homestead until the trial is complete and Blackwell's organization is dismantled. After that, he paused, considering. After that, we'll need to find a more permanent solution. I have solution, Chief Lone Wolf said in halting but clear English, surprising everyone by speaking directly rather than through the translator. He looked at Emma with grave respect. You save Pawnee warrior. You show courage and honor. You are welcome among Pawnee people. Not as prisoner, not as guest, but as sister. We teach you our ways. You teach us yours. You be bridge between two. Peoples help us understand each other. Help prevent more suffering and misunderstanding. Emma felt her breath catch. It was an extraordinary offer, one that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. To live among the Pawnee, to serve as a liaison between cultures, to use her unique position to foster understanding, it was exactly the kind of purpose she'd been seeking without knowing it. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. That's a real touching offer, Chief, but the girl ain't going nowhere. Everyone turned to see Cyrus Blackwell riding toward them with at least 20 armed men, all heavily armed and spread out in a formation that spoke of military training. They had circled around, approaching from the south where the attention had been focused on the standoff to the north. Captain Wright's hand moved toward his sidearm, and the cavalry soldiers behind him readied their rifles. The Pawnee scouts had already drawn bows and leveled rifles. Emma found herself in the center of a potential battlefield, with armed men on all sides ready to open fire. "Stand down, Blackwell," Captain Wright commanded. "You're under arrest for fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. Order your men to lower their weapons." Blackwell laughed, a sound without humor. "I don't think so, Captain. See, you've got maybe 20 soldiers here, and the Indians have another dozen or so. I've got 20 men, and another 30 waiting just over that rise, and all of them are willing to fight to protect our land claims and our investments. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over those documents, you're going to release my men, and you're going to forget this whole thing ever happened. And if we don't?" Wright's voice was steel. "Then we have ourselves a bloodbath right here on the Kansas prairie. Your soldiers die, the Indians die, and that meddling girl definitely dies. Is that really worth it over some paperwork and the word of a savage?" The tension was suffocating. Emma could see fingers tightening on triggers, could see the Pawnee scouts preparing for battle, could see the cavalry soldiers calculating angles and positions. One wrong move, one nervous twitch, and dozens of people would die in seconds, and it would be her fault. Her choice to help Lone Hawk, her refusal to stay silent, had led to this moment where good people were preparing to die because she'd done what she thought was right. "Wait!" Emma's voice cut through the tension, surprisingly steady despite her pounding heart. She nudged Duchess forward, moving into the open space between the two groups of armed men. "Mr. Blackwell, I have a proposition." "Emma, get back," Captain Wright started, but she ignored him. "You want to avoid bloodshed, Mr. Blackwell. So do I. So here's what I offer. You let Captain Wright and his soldiers leave with your men as prisoners. You let the Pawnee scouts return to their camp without interference. You abandon your fraudulent land claims and leave this territory." Blackwell's laugh was genuinely amused this time. "And why in God's name would I agree to any of that? Because if you don't, I have something you need." Emma reached into her shirt and pulled out a small leather journal she'd been carrying since she'd searched Lone Hawk's belongings on his first night in her home. Lone Hawk kept detailed records of everything he discovered: names, dates, amounts paid in bribes, which officials were involved, which land parcels were stolen. This journal has everything needed to not just prosecute you, but to bring down everyone involved in your organization, including several very powerful men in Topeka and Washington. She could see Blackwell's expression change, see the calculation in his eyes. "That could be anything. You're bluffing." "Am I? You want to risk it? Because Captain Wright isn't the only one who's going to see this journal. I'm sending copies to every newspaper in Kansas, to the territorial governor, to the federal land office, and to the Army Inspector General. Even if something happens to me, even if you kill everyone here today, those copies will still arrive. Your entire operation will be exposed, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, if you're lucky. More likely, you'll hang." The silence stretched out. broken only by the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. Blackwell stared at Emma, and she stared back, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Everything depended on this moment, on whether Blackwell believed she really would expose everything, even at the cost of her own life. Finally, Blackwell spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You're a foolish little girl playing a very dangerous game. You think you've won something here, but all you've done is make yourself a target. Today isn't the end of this." "It's just the beginning." "Maybe," Emma agreed. "But today, right now, you're going to order your men to stand down and ride away, because the alternative is that we all die here, and your secrets get exposed anyway. At least, if you ride away, you live to fight another day. Isn't that better than dying on the prairie for nothing?" For a long, terrible moment, Emma thought Blackwell would refuse. She could see the fury in his face, the desire to solve this problem with violence the way he'd solved so many others. But she could also see the cold calculation, the realization that she was right. Attacking now would cost him everything, even if he won the battle. "Stand down," Blackwell finally ordered his men, the words seeming to physically pain him. "We're leaving." "And the land claims," Captain Wright pressed. "File whatever complaints you want, my lawyers will handle it." Blackwell turned his cold gaze on Emma one final time. "You made your choice, girl. You sided with savages over your own people. You think you're a hero, but you're just a traitor. And traitors always get what's coming to them eventually." He wheeled his horse and rode south, his men following. The tension didn't fully dissipate until they disappeared over the horizon, and even then, everyone remained alert, weapons ready, watching for any sign of a trick. Captain Wright approached Emma, his expression mixing respect with concern. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, Miss Whitmore." "Probably both." "Did it work?" Emma asked, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion and fear she'd been suppressing. "For now. But Blackwell was right about one thing. This isn't over. He's going to be looking for revenge, and he's got resources and connections. You're not safe at your homestead anymore." Chief Lone Wolf spoke again through his translator. "This is why our offer stands. Among Pawnee you will be protected, you will be honored, and you will be useful, helping us understand white man's law, helping white men understand Pawnee ways. You be voice that speaks truth to both peoples." Emma looked at Morningstar's hopeful face and felt tears prick her eyes. For 8 months she'd been alone, speaking to no one, touching no one's life, and having no one touch hers. Now here was someone offering friendship, offering connection, offering exactly what Emma had been missing without fully understanding it. "Tell her," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion, "that I would be honored to be her sister, and that I have much to learn." The days that followed were challenging but fulfilling in ways Emma had never experienced. She learned to speak Pawnee with increasing fluency, learned to prepare traditional foods and work with leather and quills, learned the intricate social customs and spiritual beliefs that governed tribal life. But more than skills, she was learning belonging, what it meant to be part of a community where everyone looked out for everyone else, where resources were shared and difficulties faced together. She also began her work as a bridge between cultures. When army officers came to negotiate or discuss treaties, Emma was there to translate not just words, but intentions and context. When traders arrived with goods to sell, Emma helped ensure fair dealings on both sides. And when misunderstandings arose, as they inevitably did, Emma worked to explain each culture to the other, to foster understanding rather than conflict. It wasn't easy work. There were many in both communities who distrusted her, who saw her as a traitor or a pawn or a spy. There were moments when Emma felt caught between two worlds, not fully belonging to either. But there were also victories. Disputes resolved peacefully, friendships formed across cultural lines, small steps toward mutual understanding. 3 months after Emma joined the Pawnee camp, Captain Wright arrived with news. Cyrus Blackwell and 17 of his associates had been arrested and charged with fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. The evidence from Lone Hawk's journal, combined with Emma's testimony and further investigation, had revealed a corruption network that reached all the way to the territorial capital. The fraudulent land claims were being voided, and the affected lands were being returned to their rightful owners, including significant territories guaranteed to the Pawnee by treaty. "You did this," Wright told Emma as they sat by the river. watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. Your courage, your refusal to stay silent, your willingness to risk everything for what was right, that made all the difference. Dozens of families, both white and Pawnee, are getting their land back because of you. I just helped one person, Emma said quietly. Everything else came from that. That's how change happens, Wright replied. One person choosing courage over fear, choosing action over silence, choosing right over easy. You've made a real difference here, Emma. A lasting difference. As winter approached and the Pawnee camp prepared to move to winter grounds, Emma stood once more on a hill overlooking the vast Kansas prairie. She thought about the girl she'd been just months ago, isolated, silent, surviving but not living. She thought about the moment she'd found Lone Hawk in chains and the choice she'd made that had changed everything. She had sheltered a captive warrior in silence, and days later, riders had blocked every path around her. But those riders hadn't brought the ending she'd feared. Instead, they'd brought the beginning of something new, a bridge between worlds, a voice for understanding, a living example that courage and compassion could transcend hatred and fear. Emma would spend years among the Pawnee, becoming one of the most effective liaisons between indigenous peoples and white settlers in Kansas Territory. She would help negotiate fair treaties, would prevent countless conflicts through patient translation and explanation, would save lives on both sides through her unique position of trust. But she would always remember that it all began with one choice in the silence of the prairie, the choice to free a captive warrior, to show mercy when cruelty was expected, to risk everything for what was right. And she would always believe that this was the most important choice she'd ever made, the moment when she'd stopped merely surviving and started truly living. As the sun set over the endless Kansas grassland, painting the world in shades of gold and fire, Emma Whitmore, now also known as Kuapari, woman who stands strong, smiled. She had found her purpose, her people, and her voice. And though the path ahead would be challenging, she would walk it with courage, knowing that one person's choice to stand against injustice could indeed change the world. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying her story across the endless plains, a story of silence that became thunder, of isolation that became community, of fear that became courage. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can have the greatest consequences, and that every bridge between divided peoples begins with one person brave enough to extend their hand across the divide.